Sarah Martinez checked her watch for the third time in 5 minutes. It was only 6:30 in the evening, but she felt like she had been working for 12 hours straight. Her feet hurt from standing all day, and her back ached from carrying heavy trays of food and drinks. She looked around the Grand Meridian Hotel's main ballroom and took a deep breath. The night was just getting started. The Grand Meridian was not like the small diner where Sarah used to work. Everything here was expensive and fancy. The walls were covered with gold decorations that sparkled under the bright lights. Huge paintings in heavy gold frames hung everywhere, showing scenes of old battles and royal families. The ceiling was so high that Sarah sometimes got dizzy when she looked up at it. Beautiful glass lights hung down like frozen waterfalls, throwing tiny rainbows. On the white marble floor, tonight was special even for the Grand Meridian. The hotel was hosting a charity gala for the city's richest people. Sarah had never seen so many diamonds in one place. The women wore long, flowing dresses that probably cost more than Sarah made in 6 months. Their jewelry caught the light every time they moved. The men looked just as expensive in their perfect black suits and shiny shoes that had never touched a dirty sidewalk. Sarah smoothed down her black work uniform and picked up another tray of champagne glasses. Each glass was filled with golden bubbles that danced and popped. She had to be very careful not to spill even one drop. These guests paid $500 just for their dinner tonight. They expected everything to be perfect. As she walked between the round tables, Sarah listened to the conversations around her. The guests talked about their vacation homes in Europe, their new boats, and their children who went to expensive private schools. They spoke about charity work, but Sarah noticed they spent more time talking about the fancy parties they attended than the people they were supposed to help. "Excuse me, miss," called a woman with perfectly styled blonde hair. She wore a red dress that hugged her thin body and diamonds that sparkled on her neck, wrists, and ears. "This champagne is not cold enough. Can you bring me something better?" Sarah smiled politely. "Of course, ma'am. I will get you fresh champagne right away." The woman did not say thank you. She just turned back to her conversation about her recent trip to Paris. Sarah was used to this. Most of the wealthy guests at the Grand Meridian treated the workers like they were invisible. They never looked Sarah in the eyes when they spoke to her. They never asked her name or said please and thank you. To them, she was just part of the furniture, but Sarah needed this job. She needed it more than anything in the world. 3 months ago, she had been fired from the small diner where she worked because the owner had to close down. For 2 weeks, she could not find any work. She watched her small savings disappear as she paid for rent, food, and her 8-year-old daughter Emma's school supplies. Emma was the reason Sarah worked so hard. Emma was smart and funny and full of dreams. She wanted to be a teacher when she grew up, so she could help other children learn to read. Every night, Emma did her homework at their small kitchen table while Sarah cooked dinner. Emma never complained about their tiny apartment or their old furniture. She never asked why they could not afford the toys and clothes that her classmates had. The job at the Grand Meridian paid much better than the diner, but it was not easy work. Sarah had to remember the names of dozens of expensive wines and foods. She had to smile and be polite even when guests were rude to her. She had to work late into the night, sometimes not getting home until after midnight, but the hardest part was watching all this wealth around her while she worried about paying the electric bill. Tonight, the guests were eating food that cost more than Sarah's weekly grocery budget. They were drinking wine that cost more than her monthly rent. They wore clothes and jewelry worth more than Sarah would make in her entire lifetime. Sarah walked back to the kitchen to get fresh champagne for the woman in red. The kitchen was hot and busy. Other servers rushed around carrying trays of food that looked like works of art. The chefs worked quickly, making sure every plate was perfect before it went out to the dining room. "How are you holding up out there?" asked Maria, another server, who had been working at the hotel for 5 years. Maria was kind to Sarah and had helped her learn all the rules and procedures when she first started. "It's busy, but I'm managing," Sarah replied, filling a new champagne glass with the hotel's most expensive champagne. "At least the tips are good tonight." "That's true," Maria said. These charity events always bring out the big spenders. Just keep smiling and remember that every dollar you make tonight helps take care of Emma. Sarah nodded and walked back into the ballroom. She delivered the fresh champagne to the woman in red, who did not even look up from her conversation. Sarah moved on to the next table, refilling water glasses and taking orders for after-dinner drinks as she worked. Sarah's eyes kept drifting to the center of the ballroom. There, on a small raised platform, sat the most beautiful piano Sarah had ever seen. It was a grand piano, black and shiny, with keys that looked like perfect white teeth. The hotel staff had decorated the area around the piano with white flowers and small lights that twinkled like stars. Sarah knew that piano was worth more money than she would see in 10 lifetimes. It was made by Steinway, a company famous for making the best pianos in the world. The wood was polished so perfectly that Sarah could see her reflection in it from across the room. The keys looked smooth and perfect, waiting for someone talented enough to bring them to life. But for now, the piano sat silent and empty. Sarah wondered who would play it tonight. Probably some famous musician who charged thousands of dollars for a single performance. Someone who had studied at the best music schools and played in concert halls around the world. Someone completely different from a waitress who could barely afford to keep the lights on in her apartment. Sarah picked up another tray and continued working, trying not to think about the beautiful piano or the music that would soon fill the elegant ballroom. She had a job to do, and Emma was counting on her to do it well. The main course had been served, and Sarah was clearing empty plates from table 12 when she first heard the worried whispers. Mrs. Eleanor Westbrook, one of the event's main organizers, was talking quietly on her phone near the hotel's main entrance. Her face looked stressed, and she kept checking her expensive gold watch. "What do you mean he can't come?" Mrs. Westbrook said into her phone, trying to keep her voice low. "This is completely unacceptable. We have 300 guests here tonight who paid good money for this event." Sarah tried not to listen, but she could not help overhearing as she walked past with her tray of dirty dishes. She had learned to pick up information quickly during her months working at fancy events. The wealthy guests often forgot that the workers had ears and could understand their conversations. "I don't care if he has the flu," Mrs. Westbrook continued. "Find someone else, find anyone else. These people expect entertainment, and I promise them the best." Sarah felt a cold feeling in her stomach. She looked across the ballroom at the beautiful piano sitting silent and empty. If there was a problem with the entertainment, it could affect everyone working tonight. Unhappy guests sometimes complained to the hotel management, and complaints could cost people their jobs. Margaret Thornfield, the hotel's event coordinator, hurried over to Mrs. Westbrook. Margaret was a tall, thin woman who always wore her hair pulled back tightly and carried a clipboard everywhere she went. She took her job very seriously and expected everything to run perfectly. "Eleanor, what's happening?" Margaret asked. "I just got a call from the kitchen saying you looked upset." Mrs. Westbrook hung up her phone and turned to Margaret. Her face was pale under her perfect makeup. "David Morrison can't perform tonight. His manager just called. He's sick with some kind of virus and can't travel." Margaret's mouth fell open. "David Morrison? The pianist? But he's supposed to start playing in 30 minutes. The program says 8 o'clock, and it's already 7:30. "I know what time it is," Mrs. Westbrook said sharply. "I've been calling everyone I can think of. Every good pianist in the city is already booked for Saturday night events, or they live too far away to get here in time." Sarah watched the two women from across the room. She could see the panic in their eyes. David Morrison was supposed to be the main entertainment for the evening. The guests had paid $500 per person, partly because they were promised a performance by one of the state's most famous classical pianists. Margaret started pacing back and forth, her high heels clicking on the marble floor. "What about the hotel's regular pianist? The one who plays in the lobby on weeknights?" "He's visiting his sister in another state," Mrs. Westbrook replied. "I already checked." "Margaret, we need to face facts. We might have to announce that there will be no musical performance tonight." Absolutely not, Margaret said firmly. Do you know what these people will do if we disappoint them? They'll demand their money back. They'll write bad reviews. They'll never book another event at this hotel. My job could be on the line. Sarah continued working, but she kept watching the two women. Other hotel staff members were starting to notice the problem too. She saw several servers and kitchen workers glancing nervously toward Mrs. Westbrook and Margaret. The guests were finishing their main course and would soon expect the entertainment to begin. Sarah could see some of them checking their watches and looking toward the empty piano. A few were already asking their servers when the music would start. Maybe we could play recorded music instead? Margaret suggested desperately. Mrs. Westbrook shook her head. These people can afford to listen to recorded music at home. They came here for a live performance. They want to see a real artist playing that piano. Sarah delivered her tray to the kitchen and came back out to serve coffee and dessert. The dessert was a fancy chocolate cake with gold decorations that probably cost $50 per slice. But even the beautiful dessert could not hide the growing tension in the room. Margaret was now making phone calls of her own, walking quickly around the edge of the ballroom while she spoke to different musicians and booking agents. Sarah could hear pieces of her conversations as she worked. I need someone tonight? Yes, I know it's short notice. No, $2,000 is not enough. How about $3,000? You're kidding me. $5,000 for 2 hours. Of piano music? Even when Margaret offered huge amounts of money, she could not find anyone available. All the professional musicians were already performing at other events, or they lived too far away to arrive in time. Mrs. Westbrook walked over to the microphone that had been set up near the piano. She tapped it gently and the sound echoed through the ballroom. Conversations slowly stopped as 300 wealthy guests turned their attention to her. Ladies and gentlemen, Mrs. Westbrook began, her voice shaking slightly. I hope you are all enjoying your dinner and the wonderful evening we've prepared for you. Polite applause filled the room. Sarah noticed that some guests looked impatient. They had finished eating and were ready for the entertainment to begin. I'm afraid I have some disappointing news to share with you, Mrs. Westbrook continued. Our scheduled pianist, David Morrison, has become ill and will not be able to perform for us tonight. A wave of disappointed murmurs swept through the ballroom. Sarah saw several guests shaking their heads and looking annoyed. A man at table 5 stood up and started walking toward the exit. His wife grabbed his arm and whispered something in his ear, but he looked angry. We are doing everything possible to find a replacement, Mrs. Westbrook said quickly. Please enjoy your dessert and coffee, and we hope to have good news for you very soon. But Sarah could see in Mrs. Westbrook's eyes that she did not believe her own words. There was no replacement coming. The beautiful piano would sit silent all night, and 300 wealthy guests would go home disappointed. Some guests were already standing up from their tables. They had paid a lot of money for this evening, and music was supposed to be part of what they bought. Without the entertainment, many of them felt cheated. Sarah watched Margaret make more desperate phone calls while Mrs. Westbrook tried to calm down angry guests. The hotel manager appeared and started having a heated conversation with both women near the entrance. The evening that had started so perfectly was falling apart, and Sarah knew that everyone who worked for the hotel tonight might suffer because of it. Bad events meant bad reviews, and bad reviews meant fewer bookings in the future. Fewer bookings meant fewer jobs for people like Sarah who needed every dollar they could earn. She looked again at the silent piano, its black surface reflecting the light from the crystal chandeliers above. Somewhere in the back of her mind, old memories started to stir, but Sarah pushed them away. She had work to finish, and dreams were a luxury she could not afford. Sarah was refilling water glasses at table 7 when the memories hit her like a wave. The sound of piano keys being tested echoed across the ballroom as a hotel technician checked the microphone system near the beautiful Steinway piano. That simple sound of fingers touching keys sent Sarah back in time to when she was just 8 years old. She remembered sitting on a small wooden bench next to her grandmother Rosa in the tiny living room of their old house. Grandma Rosa's piano was nothing like the shiny black beauty that now sat silent in the Grand Meridian Ballroom. It was an old, upright piano with scratched wood and keys that were yellowed with age. Some of the keys stuck when you pressed them, and it was always slightly out of tune, but to young Sarah, that old piano was magic. "Put your fingers here, Mia," Grandma Rosa had said in her gentle voice, guiding Sarah's small hands to the keys. "Feel how smooth they are. Each key has its own voice, its own story to tell." Sarah smiled sadly as she remembered those afternoons after school. While other children played outside or watched television, Sarah sat with her grandmother learning to read music and play simple songs. Grandma Rosa had been a piano teacher before she got married, and she saw something special in Sarah Wright. "Away, you have good hands for music," Grandma Rosa would say. "Long fingers, strong but gentle. And you listen with your heart, not just your ears." The water glass Sarah was holding started to overflow, and she quickly stopped pouring. She had to focus on her work. These memories were dangerous. They reminded her of dreams that could never come true, of a life that was impossible for someone like her, but the memories kept coming anyway. She remembered the day when she was 12 and played her first complete classical piece. It was a simple batch invention, but when she finished playing it perfectly, Grandma Rosa had tears in her eyes. "Sarah, you could be great someday," her grandmother had whispered, "really great. You have something inside you that can't be taught." By the time Sarah was 14, she was playing pieces that amazed everyone who heard her. Her high school music teacher, Mr. Peterson, called her parents for a special meeting. "Sarah has exceptional talent," he had told her mother and father. "With the right training, she could have a real future in music. There are scholarships available for students like her." Sarah's parents had been proud but worried. They worked hard at regular jobs and did not know anything about the music world. How could their daughter succeed in something so different from their own lives? But they supported her dreams. When Sarah was 16, she auditioned for the Berklee School of Music, one of the best music schools in the country. She played a challenging piece by Chopin, and when she finished, the judges sat in silence for a long moment. "Miss Martinez," one of them finally said, "that was exceptional. We would be honored to have you study here." Sarah had been accepted with a partial scholarship. She would still need to pay for part of her tuition, plus room and board. But her family was willing to work extra hours and take out loans to make it happen. For 2 years, Sarah studied at Berklee. She practiced 4 to 6 hours every day. She learned pieces by great composers like Mozart, Beethoven, Rachmaninoff, and Debussy. Her professors said she had a rare gift for bringing emotion to classical music. "Technical skill can be taught," Professor Williams had told her. "But you have something else. You make people feel the music in their hearts." Sarah remembered the first time she performed in the school's concert hall. She played Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 with the student orchestra. When she finished, the audience of students, teachers, and parents gave her a standing ovation that lasted for 5 minutes. "You're going to be famous someday," her roommate Jenny had said that night. "I'll be able to say I knew you when you were just a student, but dreams don't always survive real life." During Sarah's second year at Berklee, her father had a heart attack. The medical bills were enormous, and her parents could no longer afford to help pay for her education. Her mother worked double shifts at the factory, but it was not enough. Sarah tried to get more scholarship money, but there were many talented students and not enough funds to help everyone. She took a part-time job at a local restaurant, but even working 20 hours a week on top of her studies, she could not earn enough to stay in school. The worst day of Sarah's life was when she had to tell Professor Williams that she was dropping out. "Sarah, this is a mistake," he had said, his kind eyes full of concern. "You're one of the most talented students I've ever taught. There has to be another way." But there was no other way. Sarah packed her things and left Berklee, leaving behind her dreams and the piano that had been her life for so many years. She moved back home to help take care of her father and found work as a waitress. The plan was to save money and return to school someday, but life had other ideas. She met Daniel, fell in love, and got married. When Emma was born, Sarah's world changed completely. Daniel left when Emma was 3 years old. He said he was not ready to be a father and wanted to travel and see the world. Sarah never heard from him again. Suddenly, she was a single mother, with no money, no education beyond high school, and a little girl who depended on her for everything. For 5 years, Sarah worked whatever jobs she could find. She cleaned houses, worked in restaurants, and took care of other people's children. Every day was about survival, about making sure Emma had food, clothes, and a safe place to live. Sarah had not touched a piano in over 8 years, she told herself. She was too busy, too tired, too focused on more important things. But the truth was that playing piano reminded her of dreams that had died, of a person she used to be but could never be again. Sometimes, late at night when Emma was sleeping, Sarah would remember the feeling of her fingers on the keys, the way music could fill her heart and make everything else disappear. But those memories hurt too much, so she learned to push them away. Now, standing in the Grand Meridian ballroom surrounded by wealth and luxury she would never have, Sarah stared at the silent piano and felt those old dreams stirring again. She could almost hear the music in her head, could almost feel her hands moving across the keys, but she was not that person anymore. She was just a waitress trying to make enough money to pay the rent and buy groceries for her daughter. Dreams were for people who could afford them, and Sarah had learned long ago that she was not one of those people. She picked up her tray and went back to work, trying to ignore the beautiful piano and the ache in her heart that reminded her of everything she had lost. Sarah was collecting empty coffee cups from table 15 when she heard Margaret Thornfield's voice over the microphone. The event coordinator's usual confident tone was gone, replaced by something that sounded almost desperate. "Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please?" The conversations in the ballroom slowly died down as 300 well-dressed guests turned toward the front of the room. Sarah noticed that many people looked impatient. Several guests had already left, and others were checking their phones or looking at their expensive watches. Margaret stood next to the silent piano, her clipboard clutched tightly in her hands. Her perfect hair was starting to come loose from its tight style, and Sarah could see small beads of sweat on her forehead despite the cool air conditioning. "I'm afraid I have disappointing news," Margaret continued, her voice shaking slightly. "Despite our best efforts, we have been unable to find a replacement pianist for this evening. All of the professional musicians in the area are already performing at other events or are unavailable on such short notice." A wave of angry murmurs swept through the ballroom. Sarah saw a man in an expensive suit stand up and throw his napkin on the table. A woman with pearl jewelry shook her head and started gathering her purse. "This is completely unacceptable," called out a voice from table 8. "We paid good money for this event, and music was promised as part of the evening." "I understand your disappointment," Margaret said quickly, "and the hotel will be offering partial refunds to anyone who requests them. We sincerely apologize for this unexpected situation." More guests stood up to leave. Sarah watched Mrs. Westbrook rushing between tables, trying to calm down angry donors. The beautiful charity gala that had started so perfectly was falling apart. Sarah felt sorry for Margaret and Mrs. Westbrook, but she also worried about what this meant for her job. Disappointed guests would probably complain to the hotel management. They might blame the servers and other workers for the ruined evening. Sarah needed this job too much to risk losing it over something that was not her fault. She was walking toward the kitchen with her tray of dirty dishes when something inside her chest started to pound. Her heart was beating so fast, she thought. Other people might be able to hear it. She stopped walking and looked at the beautiful piano sitting empty and silent. Without thinking, Sarah found herself changing direction. Instead of going to the kitchen, she walked toward the front of the ballroom. Her feet seemed to move by themselves, carrying her toward the piano bench. What was she doing? This was crazy. She was just a waitress. These people had paid hundreds of dollars for professional entertainment, not to hear the help try to play music, but her feet kept moving. Step by step, she got closer to the piano. She could hear Margaret still talking into the microphone, but the words seemed far away, and fuzzy. "Sarah," called Maria, the other server. "Where are you going?" "We need to clear these tables." Sarah did not answer. She could not answer. Something was pulling her toward the piano like a magnet. All those memories from her childhood and her time at Berkeley were flooding back, stronger than ever. She reached the small platform where the piano sat and stopped. Up close, the instrument was even more beautiful than she had imagined. The black wood was polished so perfectly that she could see her reflection in it. The keys looked smooth and clean, waiting for someone to bring them to life, Margaret noticed. Sarah approaching and quickly stepped away from the microphone. "Excuse me, miss, I need you to clear this area. The guests need to see that we're cleaning up so they can leave." Sarah looked at Margaret, then at the piano, then back at Margaret. Her mouth felt dry, and her hands were shaking. "Ma'am," Sarah said quietly, her voice barely loud enough to hear. I might be able to help." Margaret stared at her with confusion. "Help? Help with what?" "The piano," Sarah said, her voice getting a little stronger. "I can play the piano." Margaret's eyes widened, and she almost dropped her clipboard. "You can what?" "I studied music," Sarah explained, her words coming out in a rush. "I went to Berkeley School of Music for 2 years. I know classical pieces. I could play something for the guests." Margaret looked at Sarah like she had said she could fly to the moon. She saw a young Hispanic woman in a black waitress uniform with her, hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She saw someone who spent her evenings serving drinks and clearing tables, not performing for wealthy audiences. "This is not appropriate," Margaret said firmly. "These are very important people. They expect professional entertainment, not not someone like me," Sarah finished quietly. Margaret's face turned red. "I didn't mean it that way. It's just that these guests have very high expectations. They're used to hearing famous musicians, people who perform at concert halls and opera houses." Sarah nodded. She understood. She was nobody special. She was just the help, someone who was supposed to stay in the background and be invisible, but the piano was right there, beautiful and waiting. And somewhere in the ballroom behind her, 300 people were disappointed and angry because there would be no music tonight. "What if I just tried?" Sarah asked. "Just one song? If it's terrible, I'll stop and go back to work. But if it's good, maybe it could save the evening." Mrs. Westbrook had been listening to their conversation and walked over quickly. Her face was flushed and she looked desperate. "Margaret, what's going on here?" she asked. "This server says she can play piano," Margaret explained. Still looking shocked by the whole situation, Mrs. Westbrook looked at Sarah with new interest. "You can play? What kind of music?" "Classical music, mostly," Sarah said. "Chopin, Bach, Rachmaninoff, Debussy. I studied at Berkeley for 2 years before I had to drop out." Mrs. Westbrook and Margaret looked at each other. The ballroom behind them was getting emptier by the minute as more guests left in disappointment. "I don't know about this," Margaret said. "What if she's not very good? What if she makes things worse?" "How could things get worse?" Mrs. Westbrook asked. "Half our guests have already left. The ones who are still here are angry and demanding refunds. At this point, what do we have to lose?" Sarah's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might jump out of her chest. She had not played piano in front of anyone for 8 years. What if she had forgotten everything? What if her fingers did not remember how to move across the keys? What if she embarrassed herself in front of all these wealthy, important people? But then she thought about Emma sleeping safely at home with the babysitter. She thought about the rent that was due next week and the groceries they needed. She thought about all the dreams she had given up and all the music that still lived somewhere deep inside her heart. "Please," Sarah said, looking directly at Mrs. Westbrook. "Let me try. If it doesn't work, you can stop me after one song. But if it does work, maybe we can save this evening for everyone." Mrs. Westbrook looked around the ballroom at the remaining guests, many of whom were putting on their coats and preparing to leave. She looked at Margaret, who was still clutching her clipboard and shaking her head. Then she looked back at Sarah. seeing something in the young woman's eyes that made her pause. "All right," Mrs. Westbrook said finally. "One song? But if this goes badly, you'll need to leave immediately." Sarah nodded and walked slowly toward the piano bench. Her legs felt weak and her hands were trembling. She was about to do something that could change everything or destroy what little she had left. Sarah sat down on the piano bench and felt her heart beating so fast she thought everyone in the ballroom could hear it. The beautiful Steinway piano stretched out in front of her, its black and white keys looking perfect and untouched. She had not sat at a piano like this since her days at Berkeley 8 years ago. Behind her, she could hear the wealthy guests talking quietly among themselves. Most of them were still getting ready to leave, putting on their expensive coats and gathering their purses. A few had stopped to watch what was happening, probably curious to see what the waitress thought she was going to do. "This should be interesting," she heard someone say with a laugh that was not kind. "Is this some kind of joke?" asked another voice. Margaret stood nearby with her clipboard, looking nervous and ready to stop Sarah at the first sign of trouble. Mrs. Westbrook waited next to the microphone, her fingers drumming anxiously on the stand. Sarah placed her hands gently on the keys without pressing them down. The smooth surface felt cool under her fingers. She closed her eyes and tried to remember what it felt like to play music. Really play music, not just press keys, but create something beautiful. She thought about her grandmother Rosa and those first lessons on the old upright piano. She remembered Professor Williams at Berkeley telling her that she had a gift for bringing emotion to classical music. She thought about Emma, her 8-year-old daughter, who believed her mother could do anything. Sarah took a deep breath and began to play. The first notes of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major floated gently across the ballroom. The sound was soft and sweet, like a lullaby or a memory of something beautiful from long ago. The conversations behind Sarah stopped immediately. The guests who had been walking toward the exit froze in place. Even Margaret stopped writing on her clipboard and stared at the young woman, whose fingers were moving so gracefully across the keys. Sarah felt the music flow through her hands like water. Her fingers remembered exactly where to go, exactly how much pressure to use for each note. It was like riding a bicycle or swimming. Once you learned how to do it, your body never forgot. As she played the gentle opening section of the nocturne, Sarah began to relax. The nervousness in her chest started to fade away, replaced by something she had not felt in 8 years, pure joy. This was what she was meant to do. This was who she really was underneath the waitress uniform and the tired smile and the worry about paying bills. The nocturne was a perfect choice for this moment. It was beautiful but not too flashy, emotional but not overwhelming. Sarah played it exactly the way her grandmother had taught her when she was young, with her heart, not just her fingers. Behind her, the ballroom was completely silent except for the piano. Sarah could feel the attention of 300 people, focused on her music. But instead of making her nervous, it made her play even better. She wanted these people to hear something real, something that came from deep inside where dreams lived. As the nocturne moved into its more complex middle section, Sarah's fingers danced across the keys with growing confidence. She added small decorations to the melody, tiny changes that made the music uniquely hers. Her left hand played the bass notes with gentle strength, while her right hand sang the beautiful melody. Mrs. Westbrook stood frozen next to the microphone, her mouth slightly open. She had expected maybe a simple song, something basic that might entertain the guests for a few minutes. She had not expected this level of skill, this kind of professional performance. Margaret had completely forgotten about her clipboard. She watched Sarah's hands moving across the keys and listened to music that was more beautiful than anything she had heard at the hotel's previous events. This was not just good, this was exceptional. The guests who had been leaving were slowly walking back toward their tables. They moved quietly, not wanting to disturb the performance. Some of them had never heard classical piano music played so beautifully in person. Sarah could sense the change in the room's energy. The anger and disappointment that had filled the ballroom just minutes before was melting away, replaced by wonder and surprise. She played with even more confidence, letting the music tell its story. As the nocturne reached its most emotional section, Sarah thought about all the things that had brought her to this moment. The dreams she had given up, the struggles she had faced, the daughter she was working so hard to support. She poured all of those feelings into the music. Some of the guests had tears in their eyes. They had come expecting to hear a famous pianist perform, but instead they were hearing something different, music played by someone who had lived real life, who knew what it meant to struggle and dream and lose and keep going anyway. When Sarah finished the nocturne, she lifted her hands from the keys and the ballroom was completely silent. For a moment, nobody moved or spoke. The last notes seemed to hang in the air like something magical. Then, slowly, the applause began. It started with one person clapping, then 2, then 10, then everyone. The 300 wealthy guests who had been angry and disappointed just minutes before were now standing and clapping for the waitress, who had just given them something beautiful. Sarah turned around on the piano bench and saw all those well-dressed people applauding for her. Mrs. Westbrook was clapping so hard her jewelry was making noise. Margaret had put down her clipboard and was clapping too, with a look of complete amazement on her face. But the applause was not just polite appreciation. Sarah could see in their faces that they had been genuinely moved by the music. Some of the women were wiping tears from their eyes. Men who usually looked serious and businesslike were smiling with real warmth. "More!" called out someone from the back of the room. "Please play more. That was incredible," shouted another voice. Sarah felt a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the bright lights overhead. For 8 years, she had hidden this part of herself, convinced that her musical dreams were dead and buried. But sitting at this beautiful piano, hearing the applause of people who appreciated good music, she realized that some dreams never really die, they just wait patiently for the right moment to come back to life. Mrs. Westbrook walked over to the microphone with a huge smile on her face. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, "I think we have found our entertainment for the evening. Would you like to hear more from our very talented ... I'm sorry, what is your name?" Sarah stood up from the piano bench, still feeling like she was in a dream. "Sarah Martinez," she said quietly. "More from our very talented Sarah Martinez?" Mrs. Westbrook finished. The applause was even louder this time, and Sarah heard several people calling "yes" and "more music." Sarah looked out at all those faces, wealthy, powerful people who had stopped thinking of her as just the help and started seeing her as an artist. She thought about Emma at home, probably asleep by now, dreaming her own dreams about becoming a teacher. Maybe it was time for Sarah to start dreaming again, too. Sarah sat back down at the piano, her confidence growing with each moment. The applause from the first piece was still ringing in her ears, and she could feel the energy in the room had completely changed. The angry, disappointed guests had transformed into an audience that was genuinely excited to hear more music. She decided to play something a little more challenging this time. Her fingers found the opening notes of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, one of the most beautiful and complex pieces she had learned at Berkeley. This was music that required not just technical skill but deep emotional understanding. As the first notes filled the ballroom, Sarah felt herself transported back to her college days when she had spent hours practicing this very piece. Professor Williams had told her that Rachmaninoff wrote this concerto during a difficult time in his life, when he was struggling with depression and self-doubt. The music told a story of darkness giving way to hope, of finding beauty even in the midst of pain. Sarah's left hand played the deep, rumbling bass notes while her right hand began the hauntingly beautiful melody. The Steinway piano responded to her touch like a living thing, producing sounds that were rich and full and perfect. This was so different from her grandmother's old upright piano with its sticky keys and out-of-tune strings. Behind her, the guests had settled back into their chairs, but they were leaning forward now, completely focused on the music. Some of them knew enough about classical music to recognize the difficulty of what Sarah was playing. This was not simple entertainment. This was serious artistry. Mrs. Westbrook stood near the side of the room, watching with amazement as the waitress she had barely noticed earlier in the evening brought one of the world's greatest piano concertos to life. She had hosted hundreds of charity events over the years and had heard many professional musicians perform. But there was something special about this performance, something that went beyond technical skill. Margaret had completely forgotten about managing the event. She sat down in an empty chair and listened to the music with her eyes closed. She had never really appreciated classical music before, but the way Sarah played made her understand why people loved it so much. As Sarah moved through the different sections of the concerto, her playing became more confident and expressive. She added her own personal touches to the music, small changes in tempo and dynamics that showed her deep understanding of the piece. This was not just someone who had memorized the notes. This was someone who truly understood what the composer was trying to say. The guests were completely silent now, hanging on every note. A businessman who spent his days making deals worth millions of dollars found himself thinking about the first time he had fallen in love. A wealthy socialite who usually only paid attention to fashion and gossip felt tears running down her cheeks. As the music reminded her of her father, who had died the year before, Sarah was lost in the music, her whole body moving with the rhythm and emotion of the piece. Her fingers flew across the keys during the fast, dramatic sections, then slowed to a gentle caress during the soft, romantic passages. She played with the passion of someone who had been denied this joy for too long and was finally free to express herself again. When she reached the most emotional section of the concerto, Sarah thought about her own life, the dreams she had given up, the struggles she had faced as a single mother, the long hours of work just to survive. But instead of making the music sad, these memories gave it depth and meaning. She was not just playing notes on a page. She was telling her own story through Rachmaninoff's beautiful composition. Some guests were quietly crying now, moved by music that spoke directly to their hearts. They had come to this charity gala expecting polite entertainment while they showed off their expensive clothes and jewelry. Instead, they were experiencing something real and powerful that reminded them of what truly mattered in life. Sarah transitioned seamlessly into Debussy's Clair de Lune, one of the most beautiful pieces ever written for piano. Where the Rachmaninoff had been dramatic and passionate, this piece was gentle and dreamy, like moonlight dancing on water. As she played, Sarah remembered playing this same piece for her grandmother when she was 16 years old. Grandma Rosa had closed her eyes and smiled, saying that Sarah made the music sound like poetry. Music is a language that everyone understands, her grandmother had told her. It doesn't matter if you are rich or poor, young or old, from this country or another country. When you play with your heart, people feel it. Looking out at the audience, Sarah could see that her grandmother had been right. These wealthy guests came from different backgrounds and had different life experiences, but the music touched all of them in the same way. The hotel staff had stopped working to listen. Servers, kitchen workers, and cleaning people stood quietly around the edges of the ballroom, amazed to discover that one of their own could create such beautiful music. Maria, the server who had been kind to Sarah, had tears streaming down her face. Sarah finished Clair de Lune and moved immediately into Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. This piece started quietly and mysteriously, like someone walking alone at night under the stars. As it built in intensity, it told a story of inner struggle and ultimate triumph. The music filled every corner of the grand ballroom, reaching into the hearts of everyone present. Sarah played with the skill of a professional, but with the passion of someone who had found her way home after being lost for many years. As she reached the powerful, dramatic finale of the Moonlight Sonata, Sarah's hands moved across the keys. With incredible speed and precision, the music built to a crescendo that seemed to shake the very walls of the hotel. Then suddenly it ended with a few soft, gentle notes that faded into silence. For a long moment nobody moved. The ballroom was so quiet that Sarah could hear her own heart beating. She had just played for 20 straight minutes, moving from one piece to another without stopping, creating a musical journey that had taken everyone in the room from disappointment to wonder. Then the applause began, and it was unlike anything Sarah had ever heard. It was not polite clapping. It was thunderous appreciation from people who knew they had just witnessed something extraordinary. Every single person in the ballroom was standing, clapping as hard as they could. "Bravo!" someone shouted. "Incredible!" called another voice. Sarah stood up from the piano bench, her legs shaking slightly from the emotional intensity of the performance. She looked out at 300 wealthy guests who were applauding her, not just because she was better than they had expected, but because she had given them something beautiful and real. Mrs. Westbrook was crying openly now, no longer caring about her perfect makeup. Margaret was clapping so hard her hands hurt. Even the serious hotel manager, who had been worried about angry guests and bad reviews, was smiling and applauding with genuine enthusiasm. But the most important thing for Sarah was not the applause, or the amazed looks on people's faces. It was the feeling inside her chest, the feeling of being exactly where she belonged, doing exactly what she was meant to do. For the first time in 8 years, Sarah Martinez felt like herself again. The applause continued for what felt like forever. Sarah stood next to the beautiful piano, still hardly believing what had just happened. 300 wealthy guests were on their feet, clapping and cheering for her, the same people who had barely looked at her when she was serving their dinner just an hour before. As the applause finally began to die down, guests started approaching the piano area. Instead of rushing toward the exits as they had been doing earlier, they were walking toward Sarah with smiles on their faces and excitement in their voices. A distinguished older man in an expensive navy suit was the first to reach her. He had gray hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Miss Martinez," he said, extending his hand. "That was absolutely extraordinary. I'm Robert Chun, and I want you to know that I've heard some of the world's best pianists perform, but your playing tonight was truly special." Sarah shook his hand, still feeling like she was in a dream. "Thank you, sir. That's very kind of you to say." "Kind nothing," said an elegant woman with silver hair who appeared beside Mr. Chun. "That was the most beautiful piano performance I've heard in years. I'm Eleanor Westbrook, and I organized this event. Young lady, where did you learn to play?" Like that? Before Sarah could answer, more people gathered around her. A woman in a sparkling blue dress asked about her musical training. A man with a Texas accent wanted to know if she had made any recordings. A young couple asked if she gave private lessons. Sarah felt overwhelmed by all the attention. These were powerful, important people who usually only talk to other powerful, important people. But they were treating her like she was someone special, someone worth knowing. Margaret appeared beside Sarah, still looking amazed by everything that had happened. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, "perhaps we could give Miss Martinez a moment to catch her breath." But the guests were too excited to back away. They had come to the charity gala expecting routine entertainment, and instead they had discovered a hidden treasure. Mrs. Eleanor Westbrook took Sarah's arm gently. "My dear, we need to talk. That level of talent cannot go to waste. Tell me about your background." Sarah found herself explaining her story to the small crowd that had gathered around her. She told them about learning to play on her grandmother's old piano, about studying at Berkeley, about having to drop out to help her family, about working as a waitress to support her daughter. "You have a daughter?" asked a woman in pearls. "How old is she?" "Emma is 8, Sarah said with a smile. "She's sleeping at home right now with a babysitter. She wants to be a teacher when she grows up." "And what do you want to be?" asked Mr. Robert Chun. Sarah paused. For 8 years, she had not allowed herself to think about what she wanted. She had only thought about what she needed to do to survive, to take care of Emma, to pay the bills. I used to dream of being a professional musician," she said, quietly, "but that was a long time ago. Now I just focus on being a good mother and working hard." Eleanor Westbrook shook her head firmly. "Nonsense. Talent like yours doesn't have an expiration date. We need to find a way to get you back into music." Robert Chun nodded in agreement. "Eleanor is right. Miss Martinez, I run a technology company. and we're always looking for authentic stories to support through our charitable foundation. Would you be interested in discussing some possibilities? Sarah felt her heart start to race again, but this time it was from excitement rather than nervousness. What kind of possibilities? Well, Mr. Chun said, we could start by talking about funding for you to return to school and complete your music education. We could also explore performance opportunities and help you make connections in the music world. Margaret had been listening to the conversation with growing amazement. Sarah, she said, I need to tell you something. The Grand Meridian Hotel has been looking for a resident pianist for our weekend dinner events. We've interviewed several professional musicians, but none of them had the kind of emotional connection with the music that you just demonstrated. Sarah stared at Margaret. Are you offering me a job? I'm offering you a career change, Margaret replied. The position pays 3 times what you make as a server, and you would only work Friday and Saturday evenings. That would give you time to pursue other opportunities during the week. Eleanor Westbrook clapped her hands together. This is perfect. Sarah, you could work here on weekends while going back to school during the week. We'll set up a scholarship fund to cover your tuition and living expenses. More people wanted to talk to Sarah. A music teacher offered to give her free lessons to help her get back in shape for auditions. A woman who owned an art gallery wanted to host a small concert featuring Sarah's playing. A retired music professor offered to help her prepare for re-entering music school. Sarah felt like her head was spinning. An hour ago, she had been worried about keeping her job as a waitress. Now, successful and wealthy people were offering to help her rebuild her musical career. I don't understand, she said. Why would you all want to help me? You don't even know me, Robert Chun smiled. Miss Martinez, when someone has a gift like yours, it's not just their responsibility to develop it, it's everyone's responsibility to help them succeed. Great artists make the world a more beautiful place, and that benefits all of us. Eleanor Westbrook nodded. Besides, dear, you've already given us so much tonight. You saved our event, you moved us all with your beautiful music, and you reminded us what real talent looks like. Helping you succeed is the least we can do. A photographer who had been hired to take pictures of the event approached the group. Excuse me, Miss Martinez. Could I take a few photos of you at the piano? I think this story is going to be news, and we want to make sure we document this special evening. Sarah felt nervous about having her picture taken, but Mrs. Westbrook encouraged her. This is the beginning of your new life, dear. You should have photos to remember this moment. As the photographer snapped pictures of Sarah sitting at the piano, other guests pulled out their phones to take pictures too. Someone mentioned posting on social media about the amazing waitress who turned out to be a classical piano genius. Maria, the server who had been kind to Sarah, pushed through the crowd with tears in her eyes. Sarah, I can't believe this is happening. I'm so happy for you. The two women hugged, and Sarah realized that her life was about to change in ways she had never imagined possible. 8 years ago, she had given up her dreams to face reality. Tonight, reality and dreams were coming together in the most unexpected way. As more people approached to congratulate her and offer help, Sarah looked across the ballroom at the beautiful Steinway piano where everything had changed. She thought about Emma sleeping safely at home, and she wondered what her daughter would think when she heard about this incredible night. Maybe it was time for both of them to start dreaming bigger dreams. Miss Martinez, said Robert Chun, handing her his business card, please call me Monday morning. I'd like to set up a meeting to discuss how my foundation can help you get back into music school. This is just the beginning. Sarah took the card with trembling hands. Just a few hours ago, she had been invisible. Now, she was surrounded by people who wanted to help her succeed. The charity gala had been saved. But more importantly, Sarah Martinez had found herself again. 6 months later, Sarah stood backstage at the Grand Meridian Hotel's main concert hall, adjusting the long black dress that Eleanor Westbrook had bought for her first official performance. Her hands were shaking, but this time it was from excitement rather than fear. Through a crack in the curtain, she could see the audience filling the elegant concert hall. Many of the faces were familiar, guests from that charity gala 6 months ago who had become supporters and friends. Mr. Robert Chun sat in the front row next to Eleanor Westbrook, both of them smiling with anticipation. But the most important person in the audience was 8-year-old Emma, who sat in the very front, wearing her best dress and a huge smile. The babysitter from that night 6 months ago, Mrs. Garcia, sat next to Emma, both of them beaming with pride. The weeks after the charity gala had passed like a wonderful dream. The video that someone had secretly recorded on their phone had been posted on social media, and within days it had been viewed by millions of people around the world. Comments poured in from music lovers everywhere, calling Sarah's performance inspiring, beautiful, and proof that talent can be found anywhere. Record companies had called, music schools had offered scholarships, concert halls had invited her to perform. Sarah had felt overwhelmed by all the opportunities, but Robert Chun and Eleanor Westbrook had helped her make smart decisions about her future. First, she had taken the job as weekend pianist at the Grand Meridian Hotel, playing Friday and Saturday evenings for dinner. Guests had given her a steady income that was 3 times what she had made as a waitress. More importantly, it had helped her get comfortable performing in front of people again. Then, with the scholarship money from Robert Chun's foundation and Eleanor Westbrook's charity fund, Sarah had enrolled in evening classes at the local university. To finish her music degree, 3 nights a week, after tucking Emma into bed, Sarah studied music theory, composition, and piano performance. The hardest part had been believing that she deserved all the help and opportunities coming her way. For years, Sarah had thought of herself as just a struggling single mother who had to work whatever job she could find. Learning to see herself as a serious musician again had taken time and encouragement from her new supporters. Emma had been the most excited about her mother's transformation. "I always knew you were special, Mama," she had said after Sarah explained what was happening. "Now everyone else knows it too." The little girl loved coming to the hotel on weekend evenings to hear her mother play. She would sit at a small table near the piano, doing her homework while Sarah filled the elegant dining room with beautiful music. Sometimes, when Sarah played pieces that Emma recognized, the little girl would hum along quietly. Sarah's life had become busy in the best possible way. During the day, she worked part-time at a local music store, giving piano lessons to children and adults. In the evenings, she attended classes or played at the hotel. On weekends, she performed and continued her studies. The other servers at the Grand Meridian had been amazingly supportive. Maria had been promoted to head server and always made sure to introduce Sarah to new guests as our resident pianist who used to be one of our servers. The kitchen staff would sometimes gather near the dining room entrance to listen when Sarah played their favorite pieces. Margaret, the event coordinator, had become a good friend. She often told the story of the night when a waitress had saved their charity gala, and she never got tired of seeing people's amazed reactions. Tonight's concert was different from the casual dinner performances at the hotel. This was Sarah's first formal recital, a fundraising event for the scholarship program that had helped her return to music. The concert hall was sold out, with over 500 people coming to hear the waitress who became a pianist. Professor Williams, her old teacher from Berkeley, had driven 4 hours to attend the concert. When he had heard about Sarah's story, he had reached out to offer advanced coaching sessions to help her prepare for tonight's performance. "You're even better than you were as a student," he had told her during their practice sessions. "Life experience has given your playing depth and emotion that you couldn't have had when you were younger." Sarah had chosen her program carefully for tonight's concert. She would begin with the same Chopin nocturne that had started everything at the charity gala. Then she would play the Rachmaninoff Concerto, followed by Debussy's Clair de Lune and Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, the same pieces that had transformed her life 6 months ago. But she had also added something new, a piece she had composed herself, inspired by her journey from struggle to hope. She had titled it Emma's Dream, and it told the story of a mother and daughter who never gave up on their dreams. A soft knock on the dressing room door interrupted her thoughts. "Sarah?" "It's time," called Margaret's voice. Sarah took a deep breath and walked toward the stage. As she stepped into the bright lights, the audience burst into applause. She could see Emma in the front row, clapping enthusiastically and mouthing, "I love you, Mama." Sarah sat down at the beautiful grand piano, a newer model of the same Steinway, where everything had changed 6 months ago. She placed her hands on the keys and felt that same sense of coming home that she had experienced at the charity gala. As she began to play the opening notes of the Chopin Nocturne, Sarah thought about the incredible journey that had brought her to this moment. She had gone from serving champagne to wealthy guests to being the featured performer for an audience that had paid to hear her music, but the most important change was not in her circumstances, it was in how she saw herself. She was no longer just a struggling single mother trying to survive. She was Sarah Martinez, pianist and musician, a woman who had rediscovered her dreams and found the courage to pursue them. The music flowed from her fingers with confidence and joy. Each piece told part of her story, the struggle, the hope, the triumph. When she reached her own composition, Emma's Dream, she looked directly at her daughter and played with all the love in her heart. The audience was completely silent, hanging on every note. When Sarah finished the final piece, the applause was thunderous. People jumped to their feet, cheering and calling, "Bravo!" Emma was clapping so hard her hands were turning red. As Sarah stood to take her bow, she saw faces filled with joy and inspiration. In the audience were other single mothers, other people who had given up on dreams, other individuals who were struggling to make ends meet. Her story had shown them that it was never too late to rediscover who you were meant to be. Robert Chun stood up and gestured for quiet. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said into a microphone, 6 months ago, Sarah Martinez was serving dinner at a charity gala. Tonight she has shown us that talent and determination can overcome any obstacle. I'm proud to announce that the Sarah Martinez Scholarship Fund has raised enough money to help 10 other talented individuals return to school and pursue their dreams in music and the arts. The applause was even louder this time. Sarah felt tears running down her cheeks as she realized that her story was now helping other people pursue their own dreams. Later, at the reception following the concert, Sarah was surrounded by well-wishers and new supporters. Music teachers wanted to refer students to her. Concert organizers wanted to book her for future performances. Record executives wanted to discuss recording contracts, but the moment that meant the most was when Emma ran up and hugged her tightly. "Mama, you were so beautiful up there," Emma said. "All my friends at school are going to be so excited when I tell them about tonight." Sarah hugged her daughter and looked around at all the people celebrating her success. 6 months ago, she had thought her dreams were dead and buried. Tonight, she realized that dreams never really die. They just wait patiently for the right moment to come back to life. As she and Emma walked out of the concert hall together, Sarah thought about the future. Next month, she would start advanced studies at the conservatory. Next year, she hoped to perform with the City Symphony Orchestra. And someday, maybe Emma would stand on a stage of her own, pursuing her own dreams of becoming a teacher. The waitress who had stepped up to the piano had discovered that sometimes the most extraordinary transformations begin with a single moment of courage. And sometimes when you're brave enough to share your gifts with the world responds by giving you opportunities you never imagined possible. Sarah Martinez had found her way home to the music that lived in her heart. And in doing so, she had inspired others to never give up on their own dreams.